Hello and welcome to the Russian Empire History Podcast, the history of all the peoples of the Russian Empire. I'm your host, J.P. Bristow, and this is Season 1, The Forest, the Steppe, and the Birth of the Russian Empire, and Episode 56, Andrey Bogolyubsky asserts himself. We left Kyiv shocked by its treatment at the hand of the Suzdalian troops led by Mstislav Andreyich, son of Andrey Bogolyubsky, who had sent them to seize the city, but then appointed his brother Gleb to rule in his place. The sacking of Kyiv and Bogolyubsky refusing to move to the city and rule is almost always called a watershed moment in Rus history, a turning point in its eventual disintegration, after which its continuing existence as some kind of unified kingdom is on life support. And of course, in some sense it is. It is a statement by Andrey that he does not need to be in Kyiv to be the senior knyaz of the kingdom. But on the other hand, this is our view from hundreds of years later. At the time, the other knyazes and the common people had no idea that this would be the case. Kyiv remained the richest and most prestigious city, and the clans continued their struggle to possess it. People probably thought that Andrey was acting a bit strange, and there's no sign of anyone else following his example. It will take a few more decades to show whether there has been a genuine shift in attitudes towards Kyiv. So, Gleb Yuryich takes up his place in Kyiv, and as usual, the first thing he had to do was establish relations with the Kipchaks, that is, the Polovtsi. Rival groups of Polovtsi gathered by the Dnieper to negotiate, one on each side of the river. Gleb went to talk to the Polovtsi on the Pereyaslavo side first, perhaps because he already knew them, and they reached an amicable settlement. The Polovtsi on the other side of the river were offended at being relegated to second place, and they decided to raid Kyiv while Gleb was out of town. Gleb sent his brother, Mikhailko, to deal with them. He crushed the raiders and peace was secured. So we can see that the Polovtsi continued to be troublesome, but not a huge threat. The real threat was Mstislav Izyaslavich, who was back to challenge Gleb within the year. In February 1170, he attacked Kyiv while Gleb was away visiting his son in Pereyaslavo. The allies who had previously failed to support him against Suzdalia decided to turn up this time, and he added the Berendai and the Torki as he marched, and thus was admitted to Kyiv without a fight. But his attempt to take Vyshhorod from David Rostislavich turned into a serious fight, and the town resisted fiercely. Before Mstislav could achieve any progress, Gleb was marching back to Kyiv at the head of his army, and with Polovtsi allies in support. So, after just a few weeks in the city, Mstislav abandoned Kyiv and headed back to Vladimir in Volhynia. By the summer, he was sick and dying. Yaroslav of Lutsk was the next in line to be senior knyaz of the Izyaslavichi, while Mstislav's sons received domains in Volhynia. As a former ruler, he had the right to be buried in Kyiv, but Gleb was unlikely to agree to that, so he was buried in Vladimir in Volhynia. Further north, the always difficult people of Novgorod had refused to allow Andrey Bogolyubsky to appoint them a new knyaz when he took Kyiv, but with the death of Mstislav, they had no more use for his son, Roman. Roman was asked to leave, and Bogolyubsky was asked to supply a new ruler. Bogolyubsky did his own thing once again. He neither assumed rule himself nor assigned one of his sons, as had been the general tradition. Instead, he sent Rurik Rostislavich of Vruchi. The death of Mstislav ended any doubt over who was the most powerful knyaz, as his alliance fell apart without him to provide a focal point. Andrey's alliance with the Rostislavichi of Smolensk, on the other hand, was only strengthened. He now controlled Susdalia, Kyiv, and Novgorod, and Ryazan, Murom, Polotsk, and some of the Olgovichi were his allies. Gleb managed to rule in Kyiv for just 2 years. He died in January 1171 of an unspecified cause. Like his father, poison was suspected, and like his father, he was buried in the monastery at Berestova, not in Kyiv. Some read this as the people of Kyiv expressing their continuing preference for the Mstislavichi and Rostislavichi, and continuing hostility towards the Monomashichi. Before Andrey could announce Gleb's replacement, Vladimir Mstislavich of Dorogobush occupied Kyiv. While he was admittedly the eldest knyaz of the Monomachs, he had previously renounced his claim under oath, so Andrey ordered him to leave. The standoff did not come to a conflict, as Vladimir died less than 4 months later. His death further elevated Andrey, as he and his brothers now became the eldest knyazes of the Monomachs, and therefore had the undisputed claim to rule in Kyiv. But Andrey once again did the unexpected. Rather than taking the throne for himself or giving it to another one of his brothers, he sent word to the Rostislavichi in Smolensk, reminding them that they had sworn to treat him as their father and appointing Roman, the eldest Rostislavich, to rule in Kyiv. Roman arrived in the city in July, after handing Smolensk to his son, Yaropolk. While the initial appointment of Gleb may have been an attempt to send a message that Kyiv was no longer top of the pile, this move might have been Andrey showing a more cautious side. If he had put another one of his brothers in, maybe they would have been poisoned too. Instead, he went for one of the Mstislavichi. Not the next in line by the standard succession rules. That would have been Mstislav Izyaslavich's younger brother, Yaroslav of Lutsk, but someone from Kyiv's preferred clan who was one of his allies, and who had a claim as his father had also ruled in Kyiv. For reasons the chronicle does not explain, Roman did not follow the new ruler of Kyiv tradition of establishing relations with the Polovtsi. Instead, he left it to his brother-in-law, Igor Sviatoslavich of Novgorod-Siversky, one of Andrey's Olgovich allies, to deal with the raids in Pereyaslav. Igor and Gleb's son, Vladimir, now ruling in Pereyaslav, then met up with Roman and his brothers in Vyshgorod to exchange some gifts and give some oaths. Once again, the chronicle does not tell us why Rurik is no longer in Novgorod, but there are a few clues. Rurik had apparently dismissed Andrey's Possadnik in the city, a man named Zhiroslav. This would not have pleased Andrey, as Zhiroslav would have been the representative of Susdalia in the Veche. Whether for this or for other reasons, Rurik seems to have fallen out with the citizens and left to join his brother sometime in late 1171 or early 1172. This time, Andrey appointed his son, Yuri, to rule in Novgorod, and Zhiroslav was restored to his place as Possadnik. This might have been a fairly unimpressive start to his career, but we will see plenty more of Rurik. After everything that you've heard about the last couple of centuries, you will probably not be at all surprised to learn that once the Rostislavichi were ensconced in Kyiv, their loyalty to Andrey became somewhat malleable. It began with Andrey demanding that Roman seize and send him 3 of the Kyivans he suspected of poisoning his brother. The Rostislavichi refused to comply, so Andrey ordered them to vacate Kyiv and its towns and go back to Smolensk. Then he told another brother, Mikhalko, to occupy Kyiv. Mikhalko didn't want to, and he preferred to stay in his own town of Torchesk. He sent yet another brother, Vsevolod, and his nephew, Yaropolk Rostislavich, to deal with Kyiv instead. 5 weeks later, Rurik, David, and Mstislav Rostislavichi sent a messenger to Andrey to inform him that although they had acknowledged him as their father and had kissed the cross for him, by throwing them out of Kyiv when they were innocent of any crime, he had vacated their oath. They therefore declared war and placed the matter in God's hands. They entered the city by night, imprisoned Vsevolod and Yaropolk, and Rurik sat on the throne of his father and grandfather for the first time. The Rostislavichi consolidated their position by expelling the Yurevichi from their holdings in the Kyiv lands and buying off Mikhalko with Pereyaslavo. As you might expect, Andrey was not best pleased by the news from the south. He ordered Rurik to leave Kyiv and return to Smolensk, David to go to Berlad, and Mstislav to get out of Rus altogether. The brothers were not impressed. They told Andrey's messenger to return to Vladimir and tell him that they were not his chattel and would defend their domains. To make sure he got the point, they cut off the messenger's hair and beard, a serious insult to the Rus. Now Andrey declared war. Once again, Andrey did not want to lead the campaign himself. This time, he appointed Sviatoslav Vsevolodovich of Chernihiv to lead the army, with orders to expel Rurik and David and bring Mstislav to him in person. Mstislav seems to have done something to make Andrey particularly angry with him, but sadly the chronicle does not tell us what. With that accomplished, Sviatoslav was to take Kyiv. This army was even bigger than the one he had sent against Mstislav Iziaslavich. More than 20 knyazes joined with their militias, but there was a lack of unity. The Suzdalian troops, led by Yuri Andreevich, were reliable. The troops from Novgorod and other cities were questionable in a tight spot. Andrey even ordered Roman Rostislavich to send a contingent to fight his brothers. Vsevolod and Mikhalko turned up with the Pereyaslav militia. As you've just heard, Mikhalko accepting Pereyaslav as his reward for an alliance with Rurik, you've probably got some idea about how reliable he is. Some of these knyazes were clearly there because the Allied forces were so big that victory appeared inevitable, and only those who turned up would participate in the rewards. The Rostislavichi abandoned Kyiv for more defensible positions, and Sviatoslav occupied the city. Rurik was in Belgorod, ready for a siege, and Mstislav in Vyshgorod with David's men, while David himself was en route to Halich to see if Yaroslav Osmomysl would come to their aid. Sviatoslav first moved to capture the man that Andrey wanted so badly, Mstislav. He brought his army, supplemented by the Kyiv militia and the Chorny Klobuki, and laid siege to Vyshgorod. For 9 weeks they surrounded the city to no effect. In early November, Yaroslav of Lutsk, eldest of the Iziaslavichi of Volhynia, who were so far not involved, arrived to join the attackers, if Sviatoslav would agree to give him Kyiv and acknowledge him as the senior knyaz of Rus. The Olgovichi and Andrey's brothers, Mikhalko and Vsevolod, rejected the offer because they had agreed that Sviatoslav was to get Kyiv, but this caused problems with the Chorny Klobuki and the Kyiv militia. It seems that they had not realized that the plan was for Sviatoslav to rule in Kyiv, and since they disliked the Olgovichi even more than the Monomashichi, the Chorny Klobuki walked. Coming on top of the already protracted siege, this demoralized the troops, and the internal disagreements that everyone had been ignoring started to come to the surface. The Kievan militia declared that they would not have Sviatoslav in the city. The army started to disintegrate, and while they squabbled, Rurik and the Rostislavichi returned to Kyiv themselves. But rather than reclaiming the throne, this time Rurik invited Yaroslav Iziaslavich of Lutsk to take it, and gave Yaroslav what he had demanded from Sviatoslav. He acknowledged him as the senior knyaz of Rus. Now, I realize this can be difficult to follow without a chart on the wall, so just to clarify, Yaroslav Iziaslavich is in fact the senior knyaz of the Iziaslavichi, which made him the senior prince of the wider Mstislavichi clan, and therefore senior to the Rostislavichi. However, as a son of Yuri, Andrey was from the generation above Yaroslav, and therefore he was the actual senior knyaz of the Monomakhs as a whole. So Andrey's inevitably victorious campaign to retake Kyiv ultimately ended with nothing more than a slap in the Sviatoslav did not take this well. First, he demanded that Yaroslav give him Kyiv towns as compensation, but Yaroslav told him that as an Olgovich his place was on the other side of the Dnieper, and he had no business asking for other people's patrimony. Sviatoslav declared that he had just as much right to rule Kyiv as Yaroslav. They were both grandchildren of Yaroslav the Wise, and he attacked Kyiv. He drove Yaroslav out, captured his wife, Druzhina, and treasure, and then returned to Chernihiv. Yaroslav returned to Kyiv and punished the people for failing to protect him. Yaroslav's poor showing against Sviatoslav undermined his position, and the rest of the Rostislavichi switched their support back to Roman. They sent a petition to Andrey, recognizing him once again as the senior knyaz of the Monomarchs, and asking him to approve Roman returning to Kyiv. As Andrey had already told Sviatoslav that he could have Kyiv, he was not ready to answer straight away, and he told the Rostislavichi that he would have to hold consultations first. Then, on 29th of June 1174, before he had made a decision, he was murdered by a group of his boyars at his house in Bogolyubova, as we heard in the last episode. According to the Tver Chronicle, the murder was instigated by his second wife, who it claims was a Bulgar. 20 men killed his guards and stormed into Andrey's bedchamber. Usually he slept with the sword of the martyred St. Boris above his bed, but his treacherous steward Anbal had removed it. He fought valiantly against his assassins, who were only able to wound him by stabbing him in the back. When he finally fell to the floor, they fled the scene. But Andrey was not yet dead. He dragged himself to the stairway looking for his guards. The assassins heard his cries of pain and returned, but missed him hiding in a niche by the stairs. "Disaster will befall us if the prince lives," cried the assassins. But as no one came to help, they recovered from their terror. Lighting candles, they followed the trail of the prince's blood until they found him and finished him off. Andrey became the first knyaz of Susdalia to be buried in Vladimir on the Klyazma, in the cathedral of the Dormition that he had built as a rival to St. Sophia's in Kyiv, one of 30 churches he built where, the chronicler writes, every sort of common person, Bulgar and Jew, could behold the glory of God and come to be baptized. If you recall, Andrey had acquired the name Bogolyubova after a vision. He had been carrying a Byzantine icon of the Mother of God from Vyshgorod to Susdalia. This was one of the allegedly miracle-working icons and had supposedly been painted by the evangelist Luke. According to church tradition, Andrey took it secretly, moved by the will of God. Before he reached Rostov, the Mother of God appeared to him in a vision and commanded him to take it to Vladimir instead, and to build a church on the spot where he saw the vision. Andrey commissioned a new icon of the Mother of God, which was named the Bogolyubsky, and built the Church of the Nativity of the Mother of God, where he had been commanded, which became his main residence and the place where he had been killed. We heard in the last episode how Andrey had been working with the church as a tool of his rule, creating anti-Bulgar propaganda and laying the foundations for the key role that Orthodoxy would come to have in Rus and Russian identity. It should therefore be no surprise that the church took steps to enhance his reputation after death. Episodes from campaigns he undertook for his father in his youth were attributed to the protection of divine providence. Despite his lifelong aggression against the other Rus knyazes, the Bulgars, and other neighbouring peoples. He was acclaimed by the Church as a humble and merciful peacemaker. His unsuccessful attempts to defeat the Bulgars and take over the Volga trade route were turned into successful campaigns against the pagans, in which the icons his army carried defeated their enemies with blinding rays of light issuing from the face of the Mother of God and the Saviour not wrought by hand. Andrey's unsuccessful attempt to acquire his own metropolitan in Vladimir, which would have given Vladimir equal ecclesiastical standing to Kyiv, was presented as an example of his faithfulness to the Church, rather than a move to further establish Suzdalian supremacy. His request was rejected by the Patriarch of Constantinople, who did, however, grant him a bishop, Fyodor. The chronicles try to argue that even though he was just a bishop, Fyodor was in fact independent and autonomous. When the Metropolitan Rostislav died in Kyiv in 1167, Constantinople sent her a replacement, Constantine II, who demanded Fyodor attend him for confirmation of his position. Andrey first sent a request once again that the Patriarch establish Vladimir as a metropolitanate. The Patriarch replied with a categorical refusal and demanded that he submit to Kyiv. So Andrey dispatched his bishop to Kyiv to repent for his independence and ask the metropolitan to restore relations. Constantine rejected his repentance and executed the bishop. In the later church's telling, this then became the justification for Andrey's sack of Kyiv, which was divine punishment for the mistreatment of the bishop. Similar incidents of divine intervention came to be associated with his conflicts with Novgorod and other knyazes, so it's no surprise that he was soon recognized as a martyr and later canonized. As a saint, Andrey was also considered to have blessed the Vladimir Mother of God icon, which, to believers, continued to work miracles of divine intervention to protect the Rus and Russians from Tamerlane, Ahmad Khan, and Mahmud Giray. In 1395, the Vladimir icon was transferred to Moscow, and the metropolitans and patriarchs of the Russian Church took office in front of it thereafter. Andrey was credited with contributing to the writing of the liturgy and to the veneration of Saints Boris and Gleb. His story therefore became an important element in building the narrative of Moscow and Russia as the successors to Kyiv and Rus. In this narrative, there was no room for the idea that Andrey was murdered by boyars unhappy over his failed campaigns against the Bulgars and in southern Rus, so the story became one of a Bulgar wife conspiring with faithless traitors to martyr him. Leaving the question of the historicity of divine intervention aside, we have to recognize Andrey as one of the most significant Rus knyazes. By consolidating his unitary rule over Suzdalia, he created a strong base and worked steadily to develop his domain. He used his seniority as the eldest monomach and his military strength to position himself as the hegemon of Rus. Although he did not occupy Kyiv himself and chose instead to place his representatives there, he was not attempting to break away from Rus, but rather to shift the center of power. His building program and the request to Constantinople for a new metropolitan based in Vladimir were efforts to make Vladimir a political and cultural rival to Kyiv, to go with its military power. He established dominance over Novgorod, the Rostislavichi, and the Olgovichi, and also made the Balts on the northern Dvina his tributaries. However, he was unable to extend his influence over the Izyaslavichi in Volhynia. And ultimately, he was not able to achieve his main ambitions. He failed to achieve any real success in displacing the Bulgars from control of the Volga, and he failed to get a metropolitan for Vladimir. So Vladimir failed to replace Kyiv as the leading city of Rus, and now no senior knyaz from Susdalia will ever rule there again. The main contest for Kyiv will now be between the Izyaslavichi of Volhynia and the Rostislavichi of Smolensk, although the Olgovichi will still continue their traditional attempts to push in from time to time. And in Susdalia, the Rus rules of succession will once again mean that the death of a strong and successful knyaz results in crisis. Join me next episode as another round of internecine rivalry kicks off. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.